Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Cool Sports Network. I am your host Chase Coburn, and today I am joined by a very special guest, a broadcaster for the Baltimore Orioles on MASN, Brett Hollander. Brett, thanks so much for coming on and welcome.
Chase, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad you were able to come on. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of you and your work and all the great things you do at Mass. And so I'm excited to talk to you about all the different things that have happened in your career, as well as Orioles baseball, a rough postseason. I think, this is being recorded currently the Monday of what would have been game 3 for the Orioles in the World Series. So a little hard to watch the rest of baseball this year.
Yeah, I wish I was still working. I was just at the ballpark, and the field looks great, perfect, ready to play ball. I wish it was hosting a World Series game tonight, but maybe next year because that's kind of how the cookie crumbles. But one day we'll see a World Series game in downtown Baltimore.
Yeah, I think we want to. It's been a really, really long time. Been since 1983, so over 40 years. That's before we went to Camden Yards, and obviously it's one of the best stadiums. I'm sure you could talk about that. But I've heard that we're a few years away. If the Orioles don't make the World Series over the next few years, it would become the longest the stadium has ever opened without playing a home World Series game, which I think is very interesting, shocking as well, considering the O's have had so many great runs. We'll talk about Baltimore, though. I want to talk about you first, though. Obviously, you've already achieved so much. You're doing great things in the broadcasting world. When did you realize you wanted to get into this profession, and what has been your career path since to get to the point
Well,
where you're at now?
how old are you, Chase?
13.
Okay, so I was about 8 or so when kind of the light bulb uh, clicked on in my mind that this is what I wanted to do for a living. Once I realized I was not going to be the all-star second baseman for the Orioles, I thought this was the next best thing. And I really spent my entire life pursuing it. I've been very lucky and fortunate, both uh, kind of navigating a very complicated industry, but having supportive parents and family members and being able to do it and do it at a young age and start a career down this road and never having to leave my hometown have all been incredible blessings, but also really good fortune. And I'm guessing just by our few minutes together that you're one of those guys who also had this vision at a young age,
Yeah,
because it's very clear to me how polished you are, that this
thank
is
you.
something you've wanted to do, and you've observed and you've listened and you've watched. And that's really a part of it. It's kind of in the DNA, but you can, have a lot of want to and work really hard at something and prepare and get ready for it. But I think honestly, the observing and listening at a young age is how you get better. And I was your age, and I was listening to everyone we had here locally, whether it be John Miller or Joe Angel or Fred Manfred or Jim Hunter or Tom Davis, and then all the national guys, and you're taking it all in. And to me, that's a part of the experience too, and a huge part of it. But yeah, I've wanted to do this basically my entire life, as far back as I can remember. I've always wanted to be a broadcaster.
Yeah, and you really mentioned kind of like that whole listening aspect and trying to improve. And I think that's the main thing that not a lot of people really take into sports broadcasting. It's not just talking about sports and getting on camera and practicing. That's a huge part of it. But it's also listening to your own craft, listening to others' craft, and trying to like implement it into how you broadcast on any level, whether you're a sideline reporter or a play-by-play announcer or an analyst, etc. So there's just so much work that is involved, and it's clearly shown that you have done that work as well. You've hosted your own show on various large networks throughout your career. What's the hardest part, I guess you'd say, of hosting your own show on these large networks every day of the week?
Well, back when my talk show days, I really got one of my first big breaks of doing a Monday through Friday sports talk show at WBAL. It was called Sportsline. It had been around a very long time. At the time, WBAL had the Ravens, as they still do, and they would soon have the Orioles. And obviously, those two topics, dominate. But I would say when you're hosting a daily talk show at night, you better work your tail off, whether it be coming up with topics, themes, guests to be relevant. And you better have the gift of gab, which is just the ability to kind of talk. And I was really proud of that show. It was really obviously dominated by the Orioles and Ravens, and they were actually going through some great eras. So that made the show easy, but there were so many nights where you really had to fight to be relevant and come up with something interesting. And at a station like WBAL, which is a news first station, it doesn't just keep the sports fan necessarily all day. And I always was proud of our topics where we kind of deviated from the standard sports talk show script and went into a bunch of different places. We threw stuff at the wall. We did tributes to, David Letterman's last show, or we would go places like just history of media, sportscasting, Baltimore. This is way before your time, but my guess is you've heard of the Baltimore CFL Stallions. We did reunion nights of the Stallions and the Baltimore Blast, and I'm probably most proud of those shows. And as people stop me, if they remember those days, which is now a long time ago, they'll reference those shows more than anything else. But I was very fortunate. I mean, I was on right after the Ravens lost the AFC Championship in the 2011 postseason, right after they won the AFC Championship in the 2012 postseason, after the Orioles won their first playoff game in 14 years in 2012 and beating the Rangers in that wild card game, to some really devastating losses. And I find them both to be interesting in different ways. So I've been very fortunate, a lot of right place, right time. And then, I really spent a lot of time talking about the issues of Baltimore in my career as well. And that was kind of a different turn in my career, but I'm proud of that work too. And then I was very fortunate that the Orioles called me in early 2020 to come work for them and be a broadcaster there and do play-by-play.
Yeah, you've kind of been able to stick with this Baltimore market, but I think that's one of the main things, right? You talked about having your own show. It's kind of having that creative mind. It's something that can be different when the Ravens and the Orioles may not be the main topic or have a ton of things to talk about on any given night. So I think kind of your ability to stay creative is incredible. Now, you just mentioned you work as an analyst for the Baltimore Orioles games on MASN. What do you look for during a game to make sure you're ready for your post-game coverage?
Well, when I'm different. When I'm doing play-by-play, my preparation's a little deeper and a little more nuanced to when I'm hosting the pre-post game show on MASN, which I find that work it's a different type of setup. We're usually hitting something specific in our early part of our show, whether we come up with some theme, whether it be, maybe Orioles struggles with runners in scoring position. Maybe there's a lot of roster moves. Maybe it's tonight's starting pitcher, and you're kind of focusing on one thing. When I'm doing play-by-play, it's there's a lot of nuance and detail to it, and you have to be ready for everything. I try and tell myself every day, if this game gets out of hand early, where am I going? Now, I know a lot of people in the business, no one's rooting for a 10-1 game in the third inning, but I grew up listening to John Miller and Joe Angel, and the game never stopped being entertaining, and the broadcast never stopped being entertaining. I think that's when my old talk show background really kicks in, that I'm able, I don't panic. I kind of, what we call explore the space a little bit and try a bunch of things, and I'm willing to take more chances as opposed to a game that's a 2-2 game in the eighth inning when you are really locked in on every pitch and the drama speaks for itself. When that's not the case, and you're on the West Coast and it's a lopsided game and it's 1:00 in the morning back home, obviously I'm going to take more chances, but I try and be prepared for every scenario and never really to be caught off guard. But the preparation is the key to all those things. I try and have something on every opposing player. When you call enough games for one team, like we do with the Orioles, there's very few surprises, and pretty much everything there is to know about every Oriole player, especially one that we've seen a lot over these last few years. Right. But the insight we get in the clubhouse, talking to players, coaches, whatever it might be, is all very helpful going through a broadcast. And nowadays, though, you're so overwhelmed with the amount of stats and information. I mean, I could prepare for any individual Oriole game number 10, 20, 120 for 24 hours and not have every nugget. That's how much information's out there for me to look at, or for any of my colleagues to look at. And it's really up to us, because that's obviously not possible. You're not going to prepare 24 hours for one single game. It's just not going to happen over the course of a long baseball season. We have to figure out what's relevant, why is it relevant, and can you get that information when it matters during the course of a broadcast? Because it's endless. I mean, I could look up anything about any player anytime. Major League Baseball sends us all kinds of information. Orioles PR sends us all kinds of information. The opposing team sends us all kinds of information. So we have to figure out what is relevant and why is it relevant, and can you get to that piece of information when you need it the most?
Yeah, and I think kind of covering various roles, and you mentioned the sports talk radio background. That's always so key when I think it's just finding different things to talk about, right? I'm sure that was obviously very important when the Orioles went through that rebuild. And you did witness this rebuild. You've been covering Baltimore sports for a long time. It was the really high era with Adam Jones and Manny Machado and all these other guys. The Delman double. It was a high point in Baltimore. And then they had to go through this rebuild. And I think they did it the right way. They felt like they got the right manager. We'll talk about that later. And he kind of did a good job of leading this team, but they kind of got the draft picks, and then all of a sudden they made this rapid turnaround, going from an 100 loss team to an 100 win team over the span of 2 seasons. What do you think was the key to kind of that rapid turnaround, or that rapid like switch, and how this team was able to go from one of the worst in the league to one of the best in the league?
Well, they had a plan in place with Mike Elias and his staff, and I do think they have the right manager. But they were picking 1-1 in 2019. They drafted Adley Rutschman, and except for the last final months of this past season, he's been amazing. And you hit on Rutschman and Henderson in your first draft in 19. And as Mike Elias says, the cupboard was not bare. There was Cedric Mullins, Ryan Mountcastle, Austin Hayes, Grayson Rodriguez, D.L. Hall, who turned into Corbin Burns, and right on down the list. I don't want to leave anyone out. And then you surround them with the right veterans. Things can turn pretty quickly, apparently. So you trade out, and this is not a knock on this player, but you switch out Pedro Severino, a catcher, for Adley Rutschman, and you switch out Freddie Galvis at shortstop for Gunnar Henderson, or however you want to look at the dynamics of the lineup, and it can go from bad to competitive pretty quickly. I mean, really, it may not even be that complicated. Now, finding that player is complicated. Picking the right player is complicated. Developing that player, that's complicated. But when you look at, I don't think it takes serious analytics to think you take out 2 players and replace them with 2 all-stars, and one or maybe both are generational talents. And then you have a nice core group already in place that was getting better every year, like Hayes and Mullins and Mountcastle. It can switch on a dime. And, it's not basketball where you need 1 star or 2 stars to be really good. But you can put it together pretty quickly if you draft and develop players well. And the Orioles did that.
Yeah, now they are at that point where they are contenders. They've won 100 games. They've gotten the top wild card seed in the American League. They've won the division already. They've kind of done so much in this era, and they've only improved. You mentioned the Corbin Burns trade as well. But just like the Ravens across the street, this postseason success hasn't been there. They haven't collected a single postseason win in these last 2 playoff appearances. One as a 1 seed and then one in the wild card round, but both at home. And I think that was also shocking as well, considering Baltimore is known to have one of the best stadiums, one of the best cultures in sports. What do you think has been the key reason for the O's postseason falters, and how do you think it could be fixed?
Well, I think it's a lot to do with experience on one hand. A lot of it is just you get to October baseball and it's a roll of the dice. It is it kind of has become March Madness. Now, I know the top seeds broke through this year, but it's really not been the case. I mean, last year was, Arizona. What did they win? 84 games. You can get hot at the right time.
In Texas, they were what, the 5th seed?
Texas, who was a 90-win team, did not play well down the stretch, but you can catch lightning in a bottle and get hot really quickly. I just think that you get pitched too early in a series, and then maybe you're pressing a lot, and the pitching level is so good in October, and runs are so hard to come by. I mean, look at what the struggles of Aaron Judge is going through. I mean, that's the best hitter on planet Earth, the best all-around hitter on planet Earth, I think. He or Shohei, and Judge might be better. And the caliber of pitching is better. Every at-bat is a grind. And, you go through a little slump and you're pressing, and it can get very difficult. And they're matching up against you, or they're pitching around you. It's a different game in that sense. But the Orioles, I think if they get back there in 25, one big inning early in the second or third inning where they put up a crooked number and everyone can relax and they can go play their normal brand of baseball. But on a side, Chase, I think we all know the last 2 or 3 months of the season, this offense really struggled. So it had been a problem going into the postseason, sans the last week of the regular season. So they had not been hitting. I'm not really sure why. I know Rutschman's struggles have been well documented. And they struggled hitting. They struggled getting guys on base, and they struggled knocking them in. I thought there was a lot of press, It was not for a lack of effort. It was not for not wanting to do really well in big spots, but just wasn't happening, as opposed to the first half of the year where it was the best offense in the game.
Yeah, I think the crazy part as well was throughout this entire era, everyone said, all right, they have Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, Jordan Westberg, Anthony Santander, Cedric Mullins. You have the hitting, fine. Get the pitching. The Orioles do that, right? Obviously, losing Kyle Bradish and John Means hurt, but they brought in Zach Eflin. You obviously have Grayson Rodriguez, who again got hurt as well, just a lot of rough injuries. But then you bring in Corbin Burns as ace. The Orioles only allowed 3 runs combined in those 2 games, but yet they fell short. And the irony of the whole thing is, like, everyone says, how are the Orioles going to handle the loss of Felix Bautista? He wouldn't have even been needed in any of those postseason games. So it's crazy how things kind of did happen. The Orioles seem very swing happy, though. Do you think that you mentioned the experience as well? Do you think that can be part of it? Just, you mentioned it's better pitching, it's just better everything all around. Do you think they weren't ready for that high caliber of play, especially against 2 elite pitchers and Reagans and Lugo this past year?
Well, I think they were ready for it. I think they knew it would be hard. I don't know if it's about being ready. I didn't think. I mean, I thought it'd be low-scoring games. You're hoping that you can have one crooked number, get into a bullpen, and now the leverage guys on every team are so good, so you almost have to make it happen with the middle relief of any bullpen. I just think that they were pitched to, and sometimes you do have to tip your cap. And I think the Orioles are going to put an emphasis this year on manufacturing runs and not relying solely on the home run, especially down the stretch and in October baseball. No one talks about this when it comes to the injuries. One of the biggest losses was Jorge Mateo, who's an electric player, and in close games, he can get you a run by himself without hitting a home run, which is very hard to do. So I think you want to be athletic. You want to be able to find ways to score runs in October and not totally rely on a home run. And you have the bases loaded, nobody out. And that's a situation. I saw Mookie Betts the other night. Ohtani got to third base, less than 2 outs. He knew he had to hit a fly ball to tie the game to 4 extra innings. And eventually, we know the Dodgers won with the Freeman home run. But that's a situation where you're not trying to hit a home run, nor do you need it. You need to get one run to advance the plot in the game in your favor. And Betts was able to do that. And that's team baseball. And I think the Orioles are going to put an emphasis on that this year. But there are a lot of injuries over the course of the season. You mentioned the pitching ones. The Westberg one was gigantic in a time they really needed him. But yeah, I don't think it's about preparation in the sense of they knew Reagans and Lugo would be really good.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if anyone hits Reagans the way he was doing that day. And that's just a reality of October baseball.
Yeah, I think you mentioned relying on the home run ball, and I think that's something that Orioles fans didn't really look at, or reporters even as well. Kind of early in the season when the Orioles had this, obviously, I think most people didn't expect them to continue with their pace that they were on in May to win 110 games, whatever it was. But they were scoring a lot of their runs through the home run ball. Like, they weren't having these consistent innings, and it's interesting you brought that up because I think that's something that not a lot of people are talking about. Obviously, you mentioned the bases loaded, no outs. I think it's going to haunt Baltimore for years to come. Obviously, Anthony Santander not driving in that run, and then Colton Cowser swinging at a pitch that hit him, and then Rushman getting out. It was a disastrous inning after that for Baltimore. So it's definitely something I'm sure they want back.
But I'm confident the Orioles will replace those players and be aggressive in doing so, whether it be by free agency or trade or what they have internally as well. And I believe in Jackson Holliday. I think he's going to be a much better player next year. I think the team is going to be better on day one next year just by having Felix Bautista healthy and ready to go. I think this team wins the American League East with Felix Bautista. I think he's worth at least 5 wins. I think it should be a really good bullpen. And even if Burns is not back, I like the rotation coming back, and I expect them to add. In my brief kind of sifting through the free agent market, to me, it looks like the starting market, which is rarely strong, is in fact strong. So even if you don't get Burns, you can get someone pretty good, if not very good. And then it wouldn't hurt to have a lefty in that rotation. And I expect them to have Bradish and Wells back at some point next year as well. So I think I feel pretty good about the pitching, even without Burns. Adding somebody, plus who's coming back, Felix included. I think the bullpen should be strong, especially with the best closer in baseball coming back. And then to me, what you're looking for offensively, Santander, no Santander. They're very left heavy. I think you need to find something to defend yourself against left-handed pitching, and I think they're looking for some veteran guys. They did such a great job these last few years getting the Robinson Chirinoses and the Adam Frazier's and the Jordan Lyles and the Kyle Gibsons of the world, the James McCanns of the world. And, I don't know if any leadership was lacking, but I think you need some guys who have been there before to filter around of still a very young group. We can't forget that Adley and Gunnar and Westberg are so young. I think we talk about them like they're 10-year veterans, but they are not. And I think it'll be helpful to have some veteran dudes around.
Yeah, I think it would as well. The O's do have some decisions to make. You mentioned the leadership, though. I know you said that you believe Brandon Hyde should still stick as the manager. It has been a conversation, though, around the Orioles fan base and with some reporters as well, with how the team played down the stretch. Is Brandon Hyde the right guy to get the job done? No playoff wins after 2 great regular seasons. What are your thoughts around Hyde and if the O's could possibly move on from him?
Again, I think October baseball is a total roll of the dice. And Dave Roberts and Aaron Boone might end up with a World Series here. Roberts has won in a COVID year. He's won, 9 of the last 10 NL West titles. It's really hard to break through. I mean, it's not like it was 30, 40 years ago where you have a couple of rounds. There's more rounds than ever. There's a ton of parity in the game. It's really hard to break through once you're in the dance. There used to be one winner from the American League, one winner from the National League. Then there was just a league championship series. Your odds of getting to the World Series and winning it were much higher in those days. Now you have more chances to get in, but it's much harder to break through in October. I'll be honest with you. If you told me on opening day last year that the team would be without Bradish for most of the year, Grayson the final 6 weeks, Tyler Wells essentially the entire season, John Means the entire full season, I would have told you that's a 70-win team. And the team won 91 games. And I think the manager has a lot to do with it. This is someone, and you mentioned 110 losses and a deep rebuild. He has a lot to do with getting this team to the other side of that. And, I think the team plays so hard for him, even when they were totally outmanned in 2019, 20, and 21. You could tell they played hard for him. I think he's a really good manager who gets a lot of respect from his players. And I think he's a big reason why they've averaged 90 wins over the last 3 seasons.
New owner David Rubenstein, we're talking about the offseason moves. A lot of people think he's going to have some more urgency to win. He said that in a recent interview compared to the Angelos family, who wasn't always aggressive in the free agent market. Do you think adding Rubenstein, especially someone who says he wants to prioritize winning over these next few years and not as a long-term plan, do you think having someone like him will really help accelerate Baltimore to get closer to that World Series point?
Yeah, I think so. I think fans have to be able to separate spending and winning, because they don't always come together. I think sometimes I wonder if fans rather see a team spend and lose than not spend and win, because it's not always the best thing. And it is a business. Owners are not going to spend money that doesn't help them, usually make more money, or it's just not going to drain the well and not make money on the back end of it. I do think, though, David's going to be a great owner. The team he's surrounded himself with are going to be fantastic. I think they're hungry to win, and they will explore every possible avenue to bring a World Series back to Baltimore. I'm very confident in that.
We've talked about all these young stars, obviously Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, Jackson Holliday, Jordan Westberg, just to name 3. Who is that other star, though, you think that's in this Baltimore team that maybe people talk about that maybe we haven't even mentioned yet, or someone that is not on many people's radar who is going to become one of those future stars in this lineup for the O's?
Well, I think Jordan Westberg's going to be a perennial all-star. I think he plays the game a certain way that I just admire. There's an edge to him. There's a toughness to him. And you saw it when he was out. This team lacked it big time. He does not give up an at-bat. He does not give up a pitch. He's got a lot of great athleticism and raw ability, but he's never going to be outworked. I really just love Jordan Westberg. I think he's a consummate professional and teammate, and he shows to the ballpark every day to win.
Jordan Westberg, I think, is one of the most underrated stars in the league. The fact that he only made the All-Star game this year as a reserve, I felt was very disrespectful. I think, again, one of the most underrated, underappreciated talents the game has. It's going to be a fun season in Baltimore. I think a lot of fans and reporters, including myself, like to nitpick a little bit, right? Again, no playoff success, but still what they've been able to do with the injuries and the timing of the whole thing since kind of returning from that rebuild. It is incredible the success the O's have had. We're looking forward to listening to you and all of your work, or watching you on MASN as the Orioles go through this journey, hoping to capture that World Series title. But Brett, you've gotten to such a high point in this industry, and there are many people listening to this, including myself, who would love to be in your shoes. If you had to give one piece of advice to an aspiring sports broadcaster, what would it be and why?
Well, you're well on your way, Chase. I'm very impressed. Your interviews and your polish, and that's a big part of it, by the way. But I can just tell, like it's something that's inside of you. So I'm very impressed. And to me, I think you have to be willing to stay the course in this business and in this industry. And there's no perfect trajectory or ladder to climb. There are going to be ups and downs, but stay the course. Learn it as much as you can, get as much of experience as you can, and attack it in a way where you really believe in yourself, and you're looking to get. There's no perfect finish line either, but you're well on your way. I love the entrepreneurial spirit that you have, and being creative, and you're doing great things already.
Brett, thank you so much for that. And obviously, I think talking to you and seeing how polished you are, and listening to MASN every game, you guys have so many great analysts and reporters on that team. So hearing you guys 162 games and possibly more per year is it definitely helps. An aspiring announcer, Brett Hollander, we appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chase.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode alongside a broadcaster on MASN for the Baltimore Orioles, Brett Hollander. I'm your host, Chase Coburn, and we will see you next time right here from the Cool Sports Network. Take care.